Welcome to the Performing Arts Series brought to you by the Kennedy Center and the Prince William Network. I'm Bruce Barry, one of the members of the Chestnut Brass Company, your hosts for today's program. This program is interactive, and you'll have an opportunity to ask questions of us later in the program, either by using the 800 number or the email address appearing on your screen. We do hope to hear from you. We're the Chestnut Brass Company from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. The piece we just played for you was the wonderful Cole Porter classic, Night and Day, and it was arranged by our tuba player, Jay Crush. Brass instruments can play any kind of music, and they're a lot of fun to play. If you don't play an instrument yet, we hope you'll consider learning to play one, and perhaps even one of the brass instruments that you're going to meet today. We're going to explore the brass family and tell you about some old instruments and some new instruments and kind of give you some information that puts it all together. Now, how do these things all work? Well, what you hear is this. But what really is happening is this. As you might know from science class, all sound requires a vibration. On a guitar or a violin, you actually can see that string move or vibrate. When you sing, you can feel your vocal cords vibrate. Brass players spend a lot of time learning how to get their lips to vibrate to produce the sound. And we, in fact, even give it a special name. We call it buzzing. So with that, we channel that into this instinct. This is the mouthpiece, and that is part of the three pieces that you have to have for a brass instrument. That buzzing is channeled into the mouthpiece, then all the instruments have some tubing, different amounts depending on the instrument, and at the end, opposite the mouthpiece, is flares, and that's called the bell, and believe it or not, that's to help project it even further. So when you're back all together with your pieces, and your lips vibrating, you're back at that good sound. So if we're going to use our lips to produce the sound, how are we going to get all the different sounds? Well, you can buzz your lips at different speeds, slowly or quickly. When you do that into the instrument, you get a series of notes called the overtone series. All right. There's another way we can do it other than just changing our lips, and that's by changing something with the instrument. Here's a great sound called a glissando. Now I want you to pay attention and tell me, does the sound get higher or lower as the slide goes out? Larry, could you do that again? Lower. All right. That means that as the tubing gets longer, we can expect to hear low notes. So if we have a large instrument, we have the capability for lots of good low notes. All right. This is the smallest instrument, so is it going to play high or low? When we add in all the different sizes, we get all the notes we could ever want. So now you know how the brass instruments work. Let's meet all the modern instruments. On the right, playing the tuba is Jay, and he's from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Next is Larry from Minneapolis, Minnesota. He plays the trombone. In the center is Marion. She's from Greeley, Colorado. Her instrument is the horn. The horn is the only instrument where the bell actually faces away from the audience, and she has her hand in the bell. That's to help hold it while she's standing it, and it gives the instrument a very different sound. It's velvety and more mysterious. The next instrument is my favorite. It's the trumpet, played here by John from New York City. Okay. Now that you've met all the modern instruments, we're going to play another piece for you on these instruments. Now, we're going to play a lot of old music written by old composers, but we're also going to play pieces by people living today. And the piece we're going to play for you, or part of it, it's entitled Brass Calendar. It was written by Peter Schickele. And as you might imagine, since it has calendar, there would be 12 movements. We're going to play one movement. Now, each month often has a very special holiday in it, but by the time you get to the summer months, it's less obvious, and especially with August, it doesn't come to mind immediately. So what it is this time is going to be a vacation. And Peter Schickele is from North Dakota, and he loves the West, so it's August, the Dude Ranch Vacation. This will feature our trombonist, and he'll do his impersonation of what a cowboy sounds like when he plays the trombone.
So you've had a chance to meet the modern instruments, and you might be wondering, how did brass instruments get started? If you can imagine, thousands of years ago, they may have been needing a way to communicate with people around the world or across their community long distance, something louder than your voice. Today, most people have a cell phone. Back then, you'd have to utilize what you could find. If you live near the ocean, you might find a conch shell lying on the beach. After the animal is removed, a little hole remains, and you can buzz your lips into that. It makes a really loud sound, but because it's only a short length of tubing, it can only play one sort of highish note. If you lived inland, you might find a cow horn and remove it from the animal, have a small hole in one end into which you buzz your lips, and you might have rhythmic patterns that have a meaning to your community, kind of a set of secret signals. That's the secret Chestnut Brass Company call for lunch. Bruce is holding a bugle, or John is holding a bugle. This is coiled. You can see that it's got more length than either the shell or the cow horn did. So he can actually play a few more notes. You've probably heard this in old Western movies, or if you're a Boy Scout, maybe you have even earned a merit badge in bugle calls. John is going to play one that perhaps you'll recognize. So that is, in fact, the call to the post. If you go to the horse races, that's what they play to get the horses in place. Bruce is holding a reproduction of an instrument known as the natural trumpet. This is the kind of trumpet that would have been played about 400 years ago. It has the 3 elements that you need in order to have a brass instrument. There's the mouthpiece that you buzz your lips into, a length of tubing which makes it possible to play a series of notes. And you can tell this is far longer than the bugle, so Bruce will have many more note options, and a bell to project the sound. On a natural trumpet like this, it's possible to play between 10 and 16 notes. Bruce is going to play a tune with the able assistance of John that has been popular for more than 300 years, and I imagine you've probably heard this somewhere as well. We're going to feature a piece that highlights those 2 noble-sounding natural trumpets. This is a piece by a composer named Daniel Speer, who was active in Germany between 400 and 450 years ago. So it's quite an old piece. It's just called Sonata, and it has 2 sections.
You all probably recognize this instrument. It looks just like a trombone, and in fact, it is a trombone, but a very old one. Now, the trombones were first invented more than 500 years ago, but back then they called them by a different name. They called them sackbuts. And sackbut is a funny word. It's a Flemish word that means to push and pull. And they called it that because it was built with a slide. So I can push it out to make it longer and get lower notes, pull it back in to make it shorter and get higher notes again. So the slide was a great invention, and we still play trombones today. They never went obsolete. So the other thing you notice here is we have 3 different sized sackbuts. They were built in a consort, or like a family, of small, medium, and large. Now Marion has the smallest one, the alto sackbut, so it will play the highest notes in our little group. I have the tenor sackbut, which is the same amount of tubing as the modern trombone, and it's the middle one. Now Jay has the bass sackbut, the largest one, playing the lowest notes. But it posed some problems for the player and for the instrument maker. What to do with all that tubing It's so long, and there has to be so much tubing in the slide to get all the notes to come out. Well, what to do? Jay, hold out your hand. This is the standard reach, both now and 500 years ago, but it happens to be about 6 inches too short to fully extend the slide. So it has a handle on it, which he can pump up to get all the sack butt. It's pretty odd, and it can be quite dramatic, but the most important thing about the bass sack butt was that it worked. It sounds like this.
Since the natural trumpet was used to direct the troops on the battlefield, the king said, everybody can't learn to play the natural trumpet. So there was a great need to have a soprano melody instrument, like a brass instrument, that could be heard a good distance for everyday music like feasts and weddings and such. They came up with a group of instruments called cornettos. They're a hybrid. That means that they take 2 different ideas, combine them, and hopefully come up with yet a third one that's a better idea. These instruments are part woodwind, part brass. They're woodwind in that they're made of wood. You split them out down the middle and you gouge them out to make them hollow. Like recorders and flutes, they have finger holes placed across the instrument to change the length. But it's a brass instrument because there is a cup-shaped mouthpiece into which we buzz our lips. They also come in a family or a consort. The smallest is the cornetino. It's loud and used outside in large wind bands. John and I are holding the alto from the family. This was the best solo wind instrument of its time. And one of the reasons for that is if you look where we place our fingers, the holes are evenly spaced across the instrument. That means the half steps are in tune, which is a great feature. But you can only put the holes where you can reach with your fingers. And on this size, it sounds great. Larry is holding the tenor cornetto, also called the lizardin or lizard. We actually think from the side it looks a little bit like a salamander in the curvature. If you notice where Larry's hand's on this one starts to get so large that there's no way that the finger holes are evenly spaced because your fingers just aren't big enough. But it's still a good instrument. The next one is spectacular. This instrument is called a serpent, and obviously that's because it's in the configuration of a snake. It was invented to be used in the early church. The monks would sing their chants, and if the organ didn't play along, very often they didn't sing in tune. This instrument would lurk in the background and hold everybody on pitch. It's a wonderful instrument. It can play beautiful melodies, and it has some really great low notes. We're going to mix and match the instruments of the Renaissance period, some cornettos, some sackbuts, and 2 non-brass instruments or percussion instruments. We're going to play a piece for you that would have been the kind of music you would have heard if you were living in a castle. Now, what this means in part is that there are no CD players and there's no radio, so if you want music, either you play an instrument or you know somebody that does. In fact, we're going to be in the great hall of the castle. It's after dinner, and the king calls for the musicians to entertain you. Even kings got around to writing catchy tunes, and we're going to play one by Henry VIII, the King of England. The tune is entitled Pastime with Good Company.
Now, the instruments that we've been playing for you are what we call reproductions, meaning that they're actually instruments that were built recently to look and sound like the instruments from long ago. But we also have collected some actual antique instruments. This trombone, for example, is about 150 years old. Aside from being old, though, it's not that interesting because it looks and works just like a modern trombone. Here, though, we have a set of instruments that I'm sure none of you have ever seen. These are the keyed bugles, and they're called that because they each have a set of keys on them. And those keys are really great. They're just like the keys on a modern saxophone, but these are still brass instruments because they have a cup-shaped mouthpiece into which we buzz our lips. Now, the keys were important because now the instrument maker could place the tone holes evenly distributed around the length of the instrument and not just where your fingers could reach. Also, those keys have levers which work almost like extensions of your fingers, so it's really a great invention. And these were very important instruments back in about 1820 when they were dance band instruments. Now, Bruce has the littlest one, the E-flat soprano bugle, which is the kind of instrument that a soloist would have been playing around 1820. Next to him, John has the B-flat bugle, which is just a little bit longer and plays lower notes. The two of them are both made out of copper. Now, Marion has the tenor of the family, which is called the quintet. Now, the quintet is the most rare instrument in our entire collection, and we were really amazed when we finally found one behind a washing machine in Wilmington, Delaware, with its mouthpipe soldered shut. So we had to rescue it and bring it back to life, and you're going to get to hear it in a couple of minutes. Jay has the bass member of the family, which is called the Ophicleide. The Ophicleide was a very important instrument that also played in orchestras as well as in bands, and it sounds like this. So we're going to play a piece of dance music for you from about 1830, and it's by an African-American band leader named Francis Johnson from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and the tune is called the Victoria Gallop.
The keyed bugles that you just heard had a lot of wonderful qualities, but they also had more than a few drawbacks. And one of the big problems was that they weren't very loud. In an era before microphones and loudspeakers, a powerful sound that brass instruments could produce was one of their most useful features. The keyed bugles were also very complicated. They were difficult to play. And all of these problems were solved when the first valve system was invented for a brass instrument, patented in Berlin, Germany around the year 1815. It took a while for the valves to be perfected, but by the time this instrument was built, ta-da! By the time this instrument was built, the valves were showing up on most of the brasses. This is a cornopian. It's an early form of a cornet and was built in the year 1840 in London, England. And it's a great instrument on which to see how these valves work. A valve is just a device that lets water or air go from one pipe into another pipe. When you turned on the water this morning to wash your hands, you were using a valve. On a brass instruments, the valves channel air from one tube or pipe into another. Now, as you can see, there are 3 buttons up on the top of this instrument, and each one of these controls a sliding cylinder inside the instrument with holes placed through it. When John leaves the valves alone, the air passes straight through the instrument and out the bell, just like a bugle or a natural trumpet that you saw earlier. However, each time he pushes down one of the buttons, it channels the air through an extra loop of tubing, in effect making the instrument longer. When he uses these 3 valves in different combinations, it's like 7 natural trumpets all rolled up into one horn. The cornopian sounds like this. That's a really beautiful sound, and it drew the attention of a famous instrument designer working in Paris, France, named Adolphe Sax. We best remember Adolphe Sax today as the inventor of a family of really popular woodwind instruments called saxophones. Absolutely. But before he invented the saxophones, he was the first person to put valves on an entire family of brass instruments, from the little soprano all the way down to the great big bass. The original designs, and he called these instruments sax horns. The original sax horn design pointed up into the air like this alto, middle-sized one that Marion is showing you. In the United States, however, they redesigned sax horns for marching band use. And back then, if you had a marching band, they were generally up in the front of a parade. And people were concerned that those marching behind the band couldn't hear the music. And they decided to try to solve this problem by redesigning all of the sax horns so that they would point backwards. They look pretty funny, but they actually sound very good. We have 3 sizes with us today. Bruce has the little E-flat soprano. John has the next biggest size, the B-flat soprano. And Larry has a bigger one yet, the B-flat baritone sax horn, and it sounds like this. These instruments were very popular during the American Civil War back in the 1860s, and we're going to join these sax horns with a 19th century tuba. The tuba was the last of the brass instruments to be invented. It didn't show up until 1835. And with this group of instruments, we're going to play you 2 pieces based on songs by the great American songwriter Stephen Foster, Beautiful Dreamer, and then the California Quickstep.
Thank you very much. Before we play our next piece, I would like to invite our viewers to start calling in with your questions. You can address your question to any member of this group. The phone number to remember is 1-800-672-0067. Or you can also email your questions directly to the address that's listed on the bottom of your screen. You may have questions that are regarding the instruments that we play, or what it's like to have a career in music, or some question about music in general. We would be glad to answer any question that we can. Now, this morning, we've played a lot of instruments, and a lot of old instruments, and back to some new ones from our collection. But we're going to play this next piece and return to our original instruments. Now, the original instruments, if you remember, and if you're choosing an instrument at home to play, the instruments you can choose from are the trumpet, the horn, the trombone, and the tuba. Now, the piece that we're going to play for you on our modern instruments involves some small devices that we're going to insert into our bells called mutes. Now, the piece we're going to play is by the wonderful composer Edward Kennedy Duke Ellington. Duke Ellington, of course, grew up in Washington, D.C., so we're kind of playing something close to home today. The tune we're going to play is called Creole Love Call. And the Creole Love Call is this tune that was written in 1927. Now, in 1927, that was the height of the jazz age in this country. It was just before an era that we refer to as the Great Depression. Now, in this time, there was so much optimism and so much excitement, and there was this wonderful new American art form called jazz. And Duke Ellington was at the forefront of composing for this type of music. We hope you enjoy this, the Creole Love Call.
Thanks, we like that piece as well. We'd like to give you all an opportunity to ask any questions you may have at this point. And I think we're going to start off with an email question. Oh, a phone question, okay. Caller, go ahead.
Yes, this is Christine Mitchell from Blanchard Elementary School. How do people learn to play the brass instruments if they are very, very old?
That's an excellent question. Jay?
Even though the brass instruments are very old, there are surviving books telling you how to play instruments like the cornetto and the keyed bugle that survive in libraries. In Washington, there are a number of books in the Library of Congress that you can draw on to help learn how to play these instruments. There's a certain amount of sitting in a room and just figuring it out, but there are various sources you can get. Good question.
Our next question is from an audience member. Go ahead.
Hi. What are mutes, and do all brass instruments use them?
What are mutes? That's an excellent question. And yes, all brass instruments have mutes. Mutes are just things that we put into the bell to change the sound, to get a different tone color. The most common mute is the straight mute that John has. When we put a cup on the end of what looks like a straight mute, we get a cup mute, and it makes the sound a little bit more mellow. It sounds like this. And then we have the Harmon Mute, another sound. The Harmon Mute has another name. It's also called the wah-wah mute, for obvious reasons. Bruce has another interesting jazz mute. This is the solo tone mute. And finally, we have the plunger mute, which is really what it looks like. It's a plunger from the hardware store with the stick off, and we growl into it. It sounds like this. So
there are mutes for the other brass instruments, but trumpet players tend to have the most toys. We do have an email question from Atlantic High School in Florida. Is there one brass instrument in the brass section that can cover highs and lows? We do tend to have our jobs a bit distributed, but the French horn has a 4-octave range, so we do play low and high in the realm of the brass world. But we tend to have Bruce playing all the high notes and Jay playing all the low notes when you're in a brass quintet. We have another email question, it looks like. I've noticed from your demonstrations that the instruments have evolved from long and straight to more short and rounded in shape. Do these general shapes affect the sound or the ease of playing? Bruce?
For the most part, the shape doesn't really matter. It's just whether you practice or not. But every once in a while, someone will make an instrument and the curve will be too tight, or it'll go almost at a right angle like a square. And on those instruments, they're definitely more in the challenging category.
We have a question here in our audience.
How did the group get started?
Oh, that's an excellent question. Actually, Bruce was there at the time, so maybe he'd like to go on about that.
In 1977, in the summer, a bunch of people who had never met on a street corner in Philadelphia. We had just finished music school, but we didn't yet have any jobs. And so we met on the street, and what we would do is we would play for 4 hours a day, and people on their lunch hours would come and listen to us. And if we played just the right kind of tune that had higher and faster and louder, and you could hear it over the buses, they would throw money. And it was a lot of fun. And that's how the group got started.
We have an email question asking where we find our antique and reproduction instruments. Maybe Jay would like to forward that one.
The reproduction instruments can be bought online or from certain musical instrument dealers. There are people who specialize in making accurate copies of original instruments that survive in museums. Generally, a brass instrument much older than 150 or 200 years is rather too fragile to take out and play on a regular basis. The antique instruments, and I think the oldest one we have goes back to about 1818, which would be one of the keyed bugles that we saw earlier. These have been things that we've found in old music stores and hanging in rafters in barns, people's attics. Once people see us playing in concerts like this, often they'll come up and say, our neighbor has one of those in their barn, or my grandfather has one in the basement. And when we can, we get the instrument and we have it restored, that is, all put back into working order, and use it in concerts and give it a good home.
Okay, another question from our audience.
Could you tell us more about the piece written for the 12 months of the year?
Yes. Larry, would you like to mention that one?
The brass calendar, which we played August from the brass calendar, that is a piece we commissioned from Peter Schickley. So we actually wrote a grant to raise money to pay Peter to write that piece for us. And that was a piece we recorded on a CD called Hornsmoke, which actually won this group a Grammy Award in the year 2000 for classical crossover. Thank you. Would y'all like to hear one other piece from that? We have another month. We have 11 other months, in fact, but one of them is for the month of March. Peter wrote a movement for St. Patrick's Day, which is just around the corner here.
I see we do have an email question. It looks like the high horns have both cylindrical and conical shapes. Is there a historical reason for this? John?
The only historical reason is really that a lot of things that we have in life look like what they came from originally. This, Larry showed us as a horn. And with a horn, the horn was used to signal and to communicate. And when music makers made a bugle, they made it look sort of like a horn. Our instruments, the trumpets and the trombone, are very closely related because they are cylindrical, meaning that the bore length looks like a can. It doesn't expand except for the very end. Jay's tuba and Marion's horn are both called conical. They are cone-shaped, and so they look very much like an original cone, a horn, or a conch shell. And the conical bore gives a round, beautiful, wonderful sound. A cylindrical bore gives a very straight, strong, and direct sound.
We have another question here in the audience.
Where have you performed?
Oh, that's an excellent question. This group, as you've probably figured out from our starting in 1977, has been around about 27 years. And during that time, we've traveled in every state except Hawaii. So if anybody knows anyone in Hawaii, feel free to contact us. And we've been to the Caribbean, we've been to Asia, we've been to Brazil, Canada, and we're always looking for new places to go. So music is a really fun way to get to see the world. We have an email question. What is the oldest instruments in today's performance?
The oldest instrument that we're using here today, that's an original instrument, is this key bugle here, held by John. This one is believed to be made in Holland, and we think it's from maybe around 1820.
Here in our audience.
What is the name of your CD that won the Grammy Award again?
Oh, thanks for asking. Our CD that won the Grammy Award for Best Classical Crossover Performance is called Horn Smoke, the music of Peter Schickele, and it's an entire recording of the music of Peter Schickele. Okay, email, we've got, already have what is the oldest instrument in today's performance? When was the group formed, and how often do we play concerts together? The group started in 1977, and we tend to see each other at least once a month for a tour that ranges anywhere from 3 or 4 days to maybe 10 or 12 days long, and we go all around the country. We have another question here in our audience.
How heavy is the tuba?
How heavy is that tuba?
Tubas come in a lot of different sizes. This one probably weighs around 20 pounds. It's not too bad. Remember, they're hollow. Some of the really big tubas can weigh up to 40 or 50. Don't let the size of the tuba discourage you from playing it. Bruce always says if you have a medium-sized dog at home and you can pick up your dog, you can pick up a tuba. I think there are probably 1 or 2 other qualifications, but that does give you an idea.
We have another question here in our audience.
What is the difference between a cornet and a trumpet?
The primary difference between a trumpet and a cornet is, again, bore size and bore diameter and bore shape. The cornet, as we know as a modern cornet, is called a cornet à piston, or the English called it the cornopian, and it is conical bored or mostly expanding. The trumpet is cylindrical bore or mostly 1 diameter of tube. Great question.
Okay, thank you very much. You've been a really terrific audience this morning. If you didn't get a chance to ask your question today, you can contact us by using the email address on the screen. We'd love to hear from you, and honestly, we will answer all your questions because it's actually my email address. We invite you to visit the Kennedy Center Performing Arts Series homepage, where you'll find study guide information for use in the classroom and information about future programs. You may view this program as well as others in the program by going to the broadcasts page on the Kennedy Center website. We hope you will complete the online evaluation form. The next Kennedy Center broadcast features Ballet Hispanico, in a program that presents a spirited blend of dance and narrative that provides insight into the cultures of Latin American countries. That program will be broadcast on Friday, April 8th from 11 to noon Eastern Time. We hope you can join the Kennedy Center for that performance. We would like to conclude our Chestnut Brass Company performance with another original work for brass. This is an original work by our tuba player, Jay, who did that first arrangement that we played on the program. This showcases that excitement of having started as a group performing on the street in Philadelphia. It was Chestnut Street, just in case you're wondering. We think it's a lot of fun to play, and we hope you enjoy it. Thanks for coming to our Chestnut Brass Company concert.